everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's AAOA webinar. One of the reasons that the AAOA, or Aviation Acquisitions and Operations Alliance, was created was because aircraft transactions are rarely simple. A successful acquisition depends on more than just finding the right aircraft or negotiating the right price. It depends on having the right professionals involved early, people who understand legal, financial, operational, tax, management, ownership, and insurance implications of the decision that's being made. So insurance is one of those things that can either support a smooth aircraft transaction or create serious surprises if it's treated as an afterthought. And that's why I'm really pleased to introduce today's speaker, Tim Bonnell Jr. We've been working with Tim for a few years as a client and as a business leader and as a mentor and a friend. So I'm just thrilled to be working with him in this capacity as well. Tim is one of the founding voices behind the AAOA and has been instrumental in shaping the kind of organization we want to be. And we're looking forward to learning more about aviation risk, insurance, and all of the things that go into all of that. So it's all yours, Tim. Looking forward to it.
Well, great. Thank you, Paula. I'm happy to be discussing this issue with you today. Just as you said, so much goes into purchasing an aircraft, and certainly insurance is among those, along with all the other things you mentioned. And that's why, having good aviation insurance professionals on your team is important, as well as all the other team members. But at the same time, I want to give kind of considerations, because I don't know about you, but I think a lot of us as pilots, which I am, we like to be informed, right? We like to know what we're doing. We don't want to, so we want to trust someone, to be a great advisor, but we want to have an idea. And so that's kind of the idea today. It's just to go over, 10 practical moves, 10 key moves you need to know when purchasing aircraft insurance. And some people may have been purchasing aircraft insurance for years or decades. And yet there's some simple things that are really important to keep in mind, on an aircraft insurance policies, and certainly when purchasing a new one. So I thought that's what we'd go over today. I mean, ultimately, we want to protect the equity in the aircraft and also the liability exposures that an aircraft owner has. And obviously, when you're purchasing an aircraft, you don't want insurance to be the reason it gets held up. So we want to close without friction. So the quote on the screen says, the most successful buyers handle insurance the same way they handle the rest of the transaction, right? Some people get through all of the pre-buy and buying the aircraft without, dealing with the tax or insurance, and insurance definitely has to be upfront. So they do it early, strategically, and with a clear understanding of how the aircraft will be used. And that's going to be important as we move forward in our discussion here. So with that, let's get right into the big move number one. We're dealing with financing, and with aircraft, we got to have the right pilots, and pilot approvals are actually, one of the biggest aspects of purchasing aircraft insurance. We got to ensure the accuracy of the operations, because if we mess up this part, as we'll get into here in a little bit, we're going to have major policy issues, and all these things so that we prevent post-loss surprises, which no one enjoys when we find out something's not covered or we might have a coverage issue. So we want to set it up right in order to avoid those post-loss surprises. And so that brings us really to point number one, our big move number one. Get the details right to start. The insurance policy that you purchase for an aircraft, just like any insurance policy, is a contract. It's a legal contract. It has to have legal elements and be legally constructed, and it has sections. And one of those sections is the conditions. And the policy responding to a claim is conditional on the appropriate representations of the risks. That means all the information has to be accurate. We can't lie, or we can't omit key information that would change the scope of the risk. And so we want to ensure all details on the insurance application are accurate and on all the insurance correspondent, because that's what the policy is based on. We don't want to start doing something new or not sharing something we're going to do, because even if they'll go ahead and write your policy, at the end of the day, your claim will likely be denied if that was material in the cause of the loss. So named insured, That's the person who is named at the top of the first section of the policy, the declaration section, is the organization that is the FAA registered owner if you're in the U.S. Abroad, overseas, that would be the appropriate governmental body that oversees aircraft registration. And then, so that's the named insured. Anyone else who has a financial or legal interest in the aircraft would be additional insureds. And a lot of people get those two names confused, but the named insured has more responsibilities. They have to pay the premium. They have the approval on behalf of the insured. Additional insureds just share in the liability protection and other protections as outlined in the policy. And the second part may seem trivial, but the mailing address of the policy is really important for a couple reasons. The first reason is that if there's any notice of cancellations or key policy information, it's going to be mailed, that correspondence, to the mailing address on the policy. So there are plenty of corporations whose mailing address is, let's say, in Delaware or Wyoming, and if your mail's getting sent there, your policy may very well get canceled before you ever see it. And so obviously we want to see the mail at some point in time before the policy is canceled, if that happens for any reason. And it may happen for a reason unknown to the insured. So that's important. The other thing is that the policy has effective dates. It's usually 12:01 a.m. on the start of the policy date to the end of the policy date. Let's just say January 1 to January 1. The time zone where that's affected is the time zone of the mailing address. And so, if you think you've got coverage purchased for 12:01 a.m., Pacific, and your mailing address is Eastern, you may have a couple hours of coverage gap there. So the mailing address is important. It's the one where you're going to be, right? Where you're going to get mail and where you're going to operate the aircraft. So both of those are important. Again, accurate information is conditions, part of the conditions for the use of for the policy to be legally compliant. So absolutely key. Get the details right from the start. And we'll talk about some other details that need to be absolutely accurate and policy compliant as we get into some of our upcoming moves. So let's move into the next move 2. So one of the key aspects of insuring an aircraft is the physical damage to the aircraft itself. We call that first party coverage, right? A direct accident, hail, crash, whatever it is, that is an occurrence, sudden accidental loss or repeated exposure to something that that causes a loss to the physical aircraft. We use marine terminology dating back to the insurance origins in Lloyd's of London. So a lot of times that's called the aircraft hull or the hull value. The technical term is aircraft physical damage or the aircraft value. The way that's done is it's based on the agreed value of the aircraft. The agreed value is the number stated in the policy. So if the agreed value or the insured amount is $100,000, that's the amount they're going to pay in the event of a total loss. A lot of people get this confused because a lot of us also insure cars. And cars are usually insured, with some exceptions on rarer collector cars, on an actual cash value basis. And basically, that's the value minus depreciation, or in easier non-insurance term, what the car's worth today. And so a lot of people have the misconception that an aircraft is insured the same way. No, it is actually what is agreed to in advance between the insured and the insurance company. The insured can propose a value that the insurance company doesn't agree to. And so there's going to be a reconciliation that has to happen in order for the policy to be placed. And that could be done through, justification or substantiations, with hours, engine modifications, avionics upgrades. Or if it's that big of a delta between the insurance company and the insured, they may ask for an approved, legitimate appraisal. So at the end of the day, a lot of people will say, well, I only owe so much money on the loan, and so I want to carry the loan balance as my insured amount. The problem is that if your insured amount is a lot less than the actual, cost to replace the aircraft with one of like kind and quality, the insurance company is going to total it when it can be easily repaired, leaving the aircraft owner, the insured, with a great loss of equity. So the way that works is when there's a loss, the claims adjuster for the insurance company, they're going to go out and they're going to get a repair bid, but they're also going to get a salvage bid. And if those two numbers together, the sum of those are close to or at the insured value, they're going to go ahead and total it because it's more economical to the insurance company. And that's their choice. So it's really important at the end of the day, all these other things considered to insure the aircraft for what it would take you to replace one of like kind and quality, right? We're not going to insure a 20-year-old aircraft the way a brand new one would be. One of like kind of quality, similar age, hours, and equipment. So the other thing you can do is overinsure it, right? We're going to insure like a brand new one. And in that case, it's no question they're going to repair an aircraft that should be totaled. And you're paying a lot more for your insurance because the insurance is going to be based on the amount of the insurance value that you select. So at the end of the day, get the value set for what it would take to replace it with one of like kind and quality, right? So you can use tools like Blue Book, VREF, but you can also look in the classifieds, talk to aircraft salespeople, and see what this make and model, similar like kind and quality, is going for in the market today. And that's really where you want to set the whole value. So again, there's any question, an aircraft certified appraisal would be the absolute no-brainer way to go. That gives you not only most clear, professionally trained amount, but it also gives you certified information to provide to the insurance company should there be any discrepancy on what the value should be. So getting that whole value right is absolutely big move in the process. So that's why we've got it at big move number 2. All right, let's go to move number 3. Make sure the pilots fit the risk. Okay. So often, many pilots have the means to buy whatever aircraft they want, but at the end of the day, they need experience in an aircraft that don't have the same amount of power or potential for loss. And so, underwriters are looking for that balance of experience and the capabilities of the aircraft, right? So, total logged hours, time and type, if it's a multi-engine or retractable gear or a turbine, how much time or experience do you have in those? Obviously, sometimes somebody does not have the ideal qualifications. So then you have to work with a broker who can put together a transition plan with the carrier if the aircraft and the pilot are a match. So it's not really great if a student pilot goes out and tries to buy a light jet because there's going to be an insurability issue. And you don't want to get through the transaction and find out at the last minute that we can't get insurance coverage on the $2 to $5 million airplane we just purchased. So we want to make sure that the pilot is a match with the aircraft. And if not, we're thinking enough in advance to ensure that we can find a transition plan, so amount of training and dual and other items that the insurance company would agree to in order to get an aircraft who doesn't necessarily the ideal qualifications into that aircraft. Because again, you don't want to wait through the purchase process and find out you just don't have a transition plan that's palatable for wanting to purchase the aircraft. So make sure the pilots get the risk and work in advance to make sure that, it's going to be a fit from an insurance perspective as well. So that's way up front. That's very important. So that's big move number 3. Let's look at number 4. Choose liability limits, based on the exposure, not just price. This is great advice. In some cases, we're just going to purchase the maximum amount available, especially on lower time pilots and, more complex insurance risks because the insurance companies are only going to offer the lowest limits they have. But when the situation is right, look at how many passengers, what are the revenue of the passengers, what's the exposure? When dealing with turbine aircraft, we're regularly looking at, are these employees or are these guests, right? Are we a doctor and we fly around doctors all the time or is it usually company employees? And that's important because employees are really not subject to passenger liability because they are subject to workers' compensation laws and insurance. Because injury to employees acting in the scope of their employment is the sole remedy for injuries to employees. So who's on the aircraft? What kind of damage could this aircraft do? Where is it operating? Is it flying around a lot and being pushed around a lot of other big aircraft? But match the limits, the operational exposures, the kind of passengers, the number of passengers, and then any contractual obligations you might have for various agreements that are in place. So while lower premiums are attractive, you definitely don't want to find yourself in a situation where there is a loss and there's not adequate liability limits to cover the damages, especially if you have other assets that they can go after. So, every state's a little bit different, and people set up corporations as liability protection. In some states that works. In other states, the corporate veil can be pierced in certain circumstances. So it's definitely important to be prudent in purchasing aircraft limits. Buy as much as you can that will meet your exposure. And if not, as long as you have a limit of liability that doesn't have passenger sub limits, and I'll explain that in a second, you can buy excess liability insurance. Now, unfortunately, for a student pilot or a transition risk, a lot of times the maximum limit of liability an insurance company will offer is about $1 million. And that's $1 million of a combined single limit for bodily injury, property damage, and passenger legal liability. All right. However, what they do is they will also issue what's called a sublimit, saying of that $1 million, each passenger is only eligible for up to $100,000. So we call that $1 million combined single limit each occurrence, sublimited to or with a passenger limit of $100,000. If you have that limit, you can't buy excess liability. But if you have, $1 million, or depending on the risk, you can typically buy excess liability to get the additional liability protection that you need to cover your exposures. But again, don't cut corners on aircraft insurance and think something will never happen. It's needed rarely, but when it is needed, it's very important. So, move number 4, get the right limits of liability for the operational risk, not just the cheapest. Okay, that takes us to move 5. Gather lender requirements early. All right. I talked a bit about this just a little bit as we set up. An aircraft transaction has a lot of moving parts. And if anyone's been through purchasing a major asset, certainly an aircraft, a lot of things come down to the last minute. And the last thing you want is an aircraft insurance certificate of insurance holding up, the close of the aircraft. Everything else is ready to go, and you have to get corrected certificates of insurance because the lender's requirements weren't communicated early enough. What are these requirements? Well, typically, they'll have specific language for their bank or institution. It might include that they be named as a lost payee with a breach of warranty and to have certain limits of liability or values in the coverage. So banks are different. I'm not going to get into all those complicated terms, but the certificate of insurance is going to need to meet or match the wording outlined by the lender, or if it can't, to get those addressed in advance. Because getting things done in advance is a whole lot better than doing them at the last minute. I think everyone can relate to that, but believe me, after decades in the business, that's not a fun experience. So avoid delays, avoid havoc, get the lender requirements early, and make sure those are addressed upfront. Insurance should not be a last-minute consideration because it will hold up an aircraft close. All right, let's go from big move number 5 to 6. All right, we talked about being accurate on the application, and we talked about the conditions, saying, the conditions must be met for this to be legal. Well, each aircraft insurance policy has an approved use and approved territory. And a lot of times, people will think the FAA says I can do this, so I can do it, my insurance company will cover it. And that is wrong. The FAA has their set of requirements, but the FAA is also not going to pay a financial loss if you have a claim. They're not going to pay anything. And so, same thing with, pilot requirements. The pilot requirements, you have the FAA requirements, but you're going to have the insurance requirements. Those are separate. The insurance requirements are probably going to be more strict because they're the ones who stand to, pay hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in the event of a loss. And so these are a couple of key factors. In fact, we call the 3 Ps of most common aircraft claims denial are the pilots not meeting the pilot requirements or not doing the training requirements, the purpose of use, in the policy territory, right? So coverage applies in the policy territory, and that's a geographical territory, for a purpose of use. So most aircraft policies cover, the contiguous United States, most of them Canada and Mexico, although Mexico has some other requirements that need to be addressed. Some are worldwide. However, a worldwide territory doesn't mean it can be operated worldwide because no insurance policy can violate OFAC sanctioned countries or individuals. And so you have to be you have to be very clear about where you're operating in. In addition, many foreign countries have requirements. The EU has certain liability and other requirements, including war risk, if you're going to operate your aircraft in or over the European Union. If you're flying to Mexico, you need a Mexican liability certificate. While your policy may cover you there, this is a requirement of the Mexican government. And so you have to have an official policy of Mexican liability. What does that mean? It means it has to be printed in color. This is often done at a nominal charge. Oftentimes, your primary aircraft insurance provider can provide it. If not, your aircraft insurance broker like us can find a program to get that done for you. But anyway, it's important to communicate upfront the countries, the areas that the aircraft will be operated in to ensure the policy territory is met. Or if you're into your policy period and you decide I'm going to go to fly this aircraft to, I don't know, Guam, you need to ensure that you contact your insurance broker to get this as an approved part of your coverage territory. Okay. The purpose of use. This is perhaps one of the trickiest ones because the same set of words for one company may vary significantly from another. For instance, many private aircraft are insured with what's called a pleasure and business use. Now, don't interpret this yourself. Business use, well, that means I can charter it. I can do flight instruction. No. The policy, in the written policy, those words are going to be either in quotation marks or bold. And that means there's a definition. And the policy definitions determine whether something's covered or not. So we have to go into the specific policy to see what actually pleasure and business use means. For some companies, it's basically for pleasure or incidental business travel where no charge is made. No charge, no reimbursement, no nothing. The FAA has a list of things you can get reimbursed for, but the insurance policy says no charge is made. So if you're charging someone to use the aircraft, just a buddy for the expenses, you could be in violation of your policy. Other insurance policies may allow for specified reimbursement. And some companies are very specific about what can be reimbursed, and it may not align with what the FAA says. So this one is very critical to advise the aircraft insurance broker you're working with. Are you going to be, letting a buddy rent or use this? Are you going to let your own internal corporation or the company you work for use it? Are you going to do flight instruction? Because it is critical that you get the right purpose of use. Operating that aircraft outside of the stated purpose of use of the policy can lead to a declination of coverage. And that's, again, a post-loss surprise that you don't want to encounter when you have a loss, when you thought it was covered because the FAA said you could or because you interpreted business to mean something it wasn't. So policy definitions and policy wordings are important because it is different from one insurance company to the next. Believe me, as an insurance broker for many years, I wish all the policies said the same thing because that would make life a lot easier for me. But unfortunately, it does not. So purpose of use is a huge one. And for those pleasure and business use policies, that can be a real getcha if you don't check it because it's going to get you if you don't. So I'm not here to scare anybody. I just want to point out things that I commonly see are missed by a lot of people. And, even a lot of insurance brokers don't communicate this well. So I'm an advocate for communicating this and making sure people understand what coverage they have and what coverage they don't have. So make sure your policy use and policy territory that you're going to be using the aircraft for in the territory geographically you're going to be operated in is appropriately covered. And if you're going out of the country, make sure that territory that you're flying to is covered under the policy. And again, for foreign operations, there are other coverages you will need to consider. So big move number 6, don't miss that one because it's missed all the time. Get that territory and purpose of use correct. All right. Let's keep this exciting insurance talk moving with with move number 7. Understand the coverage and deductible structure. Okay. So, what does that mean? Uh, Coverage applies to the aircraft in one of one or more states. Ground while not in motion. And for most aircraft, that means while the engine's not turning, while it's not under its own propulsion. When you're dealing with helicopters, that means the rotors are moving, right? Or in motion, meaning it is under its own movement, under propulsion. Helicopters get something special called, while not in flight. It could be in hover, not in flight. So if you got a helicopter, we'll talk to you about that. But your coverage can be in flight or ground, not in motion. And one thing a lot of people like to do is when they purchase an aircraft, it's going to be down for modifications and whatever else, maintenance for 60 days. So I want to start with ground, not in motion coverage. But more than I can count on one hand, I've had people call me and say, "Did I ever call you to put full flight coverage in it because I do ocean and we just flew it and there was an incident." So I really don't recommend that coverage too often because I've seen that happen too many times. And typically, ground not in motion coverage is not even offered by an insurance company unless the aircraft's going to be down 90 days or more because they know within the course of a year, within the policy period that they're writing it, the aircraft will be down for maintenance easily for a couple of weeks, if not more. And if they had to go and add and remove coverage every time someone took it up or down for a week or two, it would cost a lot more to insure it. And thus, the insurance premiums would have to get more expensive. So that's the coverage. And then also, likewise, deductibles, the amount you would have to pay in the event of a loss, are both written typically not in motion or in motion. Now, for some carriers, that may be none. It may be zero in motion and not in motion. It may be $50 not in motion and $250 in motion, or it could be a lot more depending on the complexity of the aircraft. But make sure you understand what those deductibles are when coverage applies. Be very careful as move number 7 about doing ground not in motion when that aircraft can fly in the near future, as we don't want to be adding more hands, more fingers to my count of people who forgot to add coverage and had an uncovered loss. It's a very unfortunate situation, so I always caution against it. So that's move number 7. Understand those structures and make sure that you don't get into that pitfall. All right, let's look at move number 8. So most policies have standard wordings, and then they have endorsements. Some people will call these waivers, although that's not the proper term. An endorsement simply amends an aircraft policy. An endorsement can be done, during or even after an insurance policy is written, and it amends coverage. There are endorsement packages that many insurance companies offer on the aircraft, depending on the company and the skill of the pilots. Those are called broad form endorsements that throw in a lot of extra coverages for ground exposures, baggage, all kinds of things like that, maybe some non-owned coverage. But there's some coverages that are really important. The unendorsed aircraft insurance policy says that we won't cover any liability assumed under a contract. Okay. It might go on and say, unless that contract meets the definition of an insured contract, which offers kind of limited coverage if it's a municipal lease and no other contractual obligations are required. But today, if you've dealt with a contractual lease or a service agreement, anything like that, they often have all kinds of fun things written in there. You agree to hold harmless, you're going to indemnify us, and all these things. And so in order to make sure that this liability we inherit under a contract has coverage up to the terms and conditions of the policy, we need to make sure that contractual liability is endorsed to the policy and that the requirements of the contractual liability are met. Now, I've talked on this issue for an hour to an hour and a half, still being brief before, so I'm not going to go into all the details, but at the end of the day, it's important to make sure that any agreements you enter into, any liability you assume, is approved by the insurance company, and that coverage they're reflected on the policy through contractual liability. Now, keep in mind, I'll say one thing, is that regardless of what the requirements are in that contract you're signing, whether a lease, agreement, or otherwise, it does not extend insurance coverage beyond the coverage it already has. So, though it may say you indemnify, a lot of indemnity agreements saying you will indemnify us, It doesn't stop at any length of time or any amount of money. So just know that by the insurance company accepting it, they're accepting it up to the terms and conditions of the policy. So the limits, values, all the other conditions of the policy still apply. And what's tricky is a lot of times, and a service provider will set minimum limits, and you already meet that, but that still doesn't limit the total amount of liability you have. That's just an important thing to keep in mind. Contractual liability is a big deal. That's again why it's so critical to work with, an aviation attorney, tax professional, insurance broker, who can help you navigate those waters and understand your liability and risks, and to try to address them contractually. Um, War risk and allied perils. So there's a whole list of exclusions for any losses caused by acts of war. But wait, there's more. There are all kinds of things it excludes, like malicious acts, acts of sabotage, hijacking, and confiscation. And I said confiscation kind of loud if you didn't notice, and that's because aircraft get confiscated for different reasons. And so we used to say if you're flying out of the country, you have to have war risk. But I've seen aircraft both confiscated in the United States when it was operated for a legal purpose. I've even seen the Cessna 172 in the heartland of America at a general aviation airport nearly be hijacked. So that's a fun, long story, but war risk and allied perils is an important endorsement. Most people blow it off because they don't think an act of war or hijacking is going to happen to them, but I always recommend it because I've seen it come up and necessary in the United States and out of it. And it's pretty disappointing when you have aircraft insurance on an expensive aircraft and it gets, detained by, foreign government or even our own government, and they find out that's not covered. Confiscation is not covered. That's not theft by a third party. That's confiscation by, a whole list of people, government entities, agents of a government or regime, so on and so forth. The other thing I want to point out on endorsements is if you're one of these people who keeps spare parts around, spare engine, propeller, whatever it might be, a lot of times those have significant value. And depending on the wording of the policy, a lot of times if those are detached from the aircraft and not replaced, they have no coverage. And so ensuring that you have some sort of spare parts coverage, especially when you have a fleet of aircraft or store extra engines, those type of things. Make sure you have spare parts coverage to include covering those large value items like propellers, engines, even avionics that have been replaced. So that's a big deal. One other note on endorsements, real quick, is the non-owned coverage that I mentioned there in bullet point number 2. Non-owned coverage is often included in an aircraft insurance policy, but that coverage can vary wildly. Sometimes there's coverage for temporary use of a substitute aircraft due to a covered cause of loss, so it's due to an occurrence that happened where there's a loss. But a lot of policies will have coverage when you operate an aircraft that you don't own or lease or that's not regularly furnished to you. A lot of pilots do this. My buddy, is going to give me a chance to fly his aircraft, or I'm going to rent an aircraft. But just keep in mind the following. That coverage is typically limited to the type of, aircraft you're flying. So if you have, let's say a Cessna 206, it's typically going to be a single engine, non-pressurized aircraft with a max 6 seats. So you can't take your 206 and go fly your buddy's, Vision Jet or Citation Mustang and have non-owned coverage. In addition, and here's a big one so many people miss, even professionals in our industry, I would say more than 50% of the pleasure and business use policies say that the non-owned coverage applies when the named insured is an individual or an individual and their spouse. And so many aircraft are held in corporations, LLCs, partnerships, and otherwise. And so that unendorsed non-owned coverage goes away. So it's important to pay attention to that if that's your circumstance and try to get the policy endorsed to your situation. So again, this is why consulting with an aviation insurance professional is so important, because there are a lot of variety between policies and you need to be very clear with what your situation is, your legal structure, so that your appropriate coverages are there and that the policy is endorsed or amended to, be sure that your situation is appropriately covered. All right. So there's a lot more we can go into on that. I'm sure, this is more than you ever dreamed you'd hear anyway, but these are some of the common, really important things that often get glossed over purchasing aircraft insurance on a daily basis. So that's big move number 8. Let's look at number 9. Coordinate binding with closing. And I've already touched on this a little bit. You don't want insurance to hold up the process. And so waiting until you find out it's ready to close and then hoping for a certificate in 1 hour is a big ask, because a lot of times those need to come from an insurance company, and sometimes they have people on vacation or at a conference. And so you want to make sure that the order to bind insurance coverage to put it in place is in line with the closing. Okay. Worst case, that can be pushed back. But here's the bottom line. The exposure for financial loss, when that occurs, whatever moment that is, insurance coverage needs to be in place, because the person with a financial or legal interest to insure the aircraft is then on the hook for any loss, whether that's a fire, a tornado, some random object, car flying into your aircraft or otherwise. And so don't purchase the aircraft and then try to get the coverage in place. And most of the time, if you're working with a bank, that's not going to happen anyway, because they're not going to close it until the insurance coverage is done. But it's absolutely critical to time. Again, you'd rather have it done in advance and amend it to a later date if it doesn't close, because you are on the line when you have the financial interest. And so coordinate that binding with closing. And again, you don't want to, for those rare surprises, it'll happen. And believe me, they do. You want to make sure that you have that protection in place on the aircraft the moment you have the financial or legal exposure to insure it. Pretty easy, but such a big deal. All right, that's move 9, which brings us to number 10. Treat the first year as part of the acquisition. You're excited about getting the new aircraft, you're diligent, but success in your first year is going to lead to your success in the upcoming years, right? Insurance policies are reviewed annually, premiums are changed. And so here are just a few things to do that we recommend. First year you own the aircraft, you'll always read the policy. Hopefully by now, in talking about the purpose of use, the pilot requirements, the policy territory, and all these other non-owned and endorsements, it's important you understand what's in that policy. So please read it. All right. Keep strong records, maintenance discipline and clear operating practices, and if there's a loss, anytime there's a loss, the first thing an adjuster is going to do is ask for all the pilot certificates, training certificates, everything to ensure that they are current. And they're going to look for the aircraft logbook to make sure that it was in compliance with everything that needed to be done. Because if not, that could pose some coverage issues. So keep those records, keep them in a safe place. And here's a pro tip: keep them organized in a place someone else besides you who operate the aircraft would be. Because in that unfortunate event, you go down with the aircraft, the people you leave behind are going to have a heck of a mess if you have not that information in a very secure and known place where they can access it. So that's a big pro tip. That's a bonus. I'm being extra generous today. But keep those strong records and make sure someone knows how to access them. We've already talked about this, but coverage does not exist outside of what's defined and outlined in the insurance policy. So if you add pilots, if you change the use or operations of the aircraft, the territory, report those to the insurance company so that they can approve them or not. You have to have their approval, not just reporting, in order for coverage to apply. So any of those changes, make sure they're recorded and approved, and everything, all I's dotted and T's crossed the insurance company. In addition, get meaningful experience, right? Especially if this is a transition. The more hours and experience you have in the aircraft, the more favorable your aircraft insurance renewal is going to be, comparatively to what the market is at the time you renew the policy. So fly that aircraft, fly it frequently. A current, trained, and maintenance-conscious pilot is always a safer pilot than one who flies rarely and cuts corners, okay? So that's good experience, and that's loss-free experience, right? I mean, you buy insurance for things to happen, but if you take good care of maintenance and don't cut corners, you train regularly and you fly regularly, in the make and model, you're setting yourself up for success. We don't get just a ton of losses with people who do that. It happens. It happens to the best pilots, but it greatly reduces that opportunity. And again, when you get to that renewal, you give yourself, the best set of circumstances for the most favorable terms for your, situation based on the market at that point in time. So do the right things. And because once you get the aircraft, that's just the beginning of the journey. And you want to do things right as you go to lead towards, successful insurance renewals and a successful insurance partnership. Long-term insurance relationships often pay dividends when there's a question mark in a loss or something needs to happen. So work well with your insurance company, fly well, avoid losses, and it pays lots of dividends. Well, Paula, that's move number 10. But like Steve Jobs, I've got just one more.
Of course.
Move number 11. And I've kind of alluded to this in the rest of our conversation, but ensure you have the right aircraft purchasing team, right? It takes coordination across multiple disciplines to appropriately and effectively and safely execute, an aircraft purchase. And so that's everything as we talked about myself and what we do, an aircraft insurance specialist, aircraft finance specialist. There are other banks who can do loans and we work with them, but someone who knows what they're doing, it often, pays dividends in terms of getting the aircraft closed on time and ensuring everything goes well. Aviation legal counsel, an attorney who knows what they're doing with aircraft transactions. The use of aircraft is such a key part in operating an aircraft and must be part of your team. Obviously, using an aviation sales consultant who knows what they're doing helps you avoid a lot of issues in the process and coordinates these things. And again, I talked about it earlier, ensuring a proper value through an aviation or aircraft appraiser is key to paying the right price and ensuring that you're insuring the aircraft at, the appropriate value. And that's really brings us back to, why we have the Aviation Acquisition and Ownership Alliance, which we'll talk about. So let's bring all this together, the 10 plus 1 moves. Before the deal, make sure you have accurate information, define the mission, the use, the pilots, make sure if there's a transition that you get that outlined early. During the closing, make sure there's alignment with the lender, the legal, the insurance, and that everything's, in line with how you're going to be operating the aircraft. And then after you take delivery, make sure you're following those good habits. It's our daily and weekly habits. It's our practices that over time lead to our solid results. And that happens in insurance as much as it is for any other goal or aspect of our life that we pursue. So early, strategic, and clear. Clear communication, honest communication, omitting information could lead to bad news for you after a loss. So that's bringing it all together. That's your 10 plus 1 big moves when purchasing aircraft insurance coverage. If you want to learn more, if you want to dig deeper, I actually have several books on aircraft insurance. They're right behind me. The Aircraft Insurance Fundamentals for aerial applicators, or what most people call crop dusters. We got a book on that. And for aviation businesses and airports, we've got an insurance book on that. Paula, as you know, we put out a couple times a month the Aviation Insurance Podcast, where we talk about a lot of things insurance for aviation and bring on aviation insurance leadership to talk about the market, where it's coming, where it's going, and all kinds of fun things and experts on safety and innovation. So I would check that out. It's on any favorite podcast player and certainly YouTube. So anyway, there's some links that you'll find probably in the notes that we provide to find those. And we would love to help you learn more about your journey and make sure that you get your aircraft purchased well and avoid those surprises. So that's the end of our journey through these brief key issues of purchasing an aircraft insurance. And Paula, you often have questions for me, so I'd certainly entertain those things.
Of course. And these were submitted by people attending the webinar. So, and I guess one thing that comes up, it is not a coincidence that you also wrote the book, Quit Jacking Around, which talks about those habits because Um, seriously, people who have good habits have fewer bad things happen to them. And so I'm certain that's not a coincidence that you wrote that book.
It's not. We can't control everything, and that's why insurance is important. Without insurance, lenders don't lend money. People don't get restored when there's a loss, and so it's an absolutely viable economic engine. But we can't control and reduce, you know, the odds or chances of loss happening, and so we control through those good habits, and same thing applies to all areas of our lives. Absolutely.
Right. So going back to your item 8, you're talking about the areas of uh, coverage, the places that things are covered. And I don't know if you've heard anything new on that 1946 Stinson 108 that was confiscated by the Red Lake Nation in Minnesota. Somebody did an emergency landing. I think this was in October. As far as I know, that airplane is still there because they're still fighting over who has jurisdiction to release that aircraft or keep that aircraft confiscated forever. We have no idea what's going to happen with that. Do you? Have you heard anything new?
I haven't heard anything recently, but that's a perfect example. A Stinson flying in the middle of the United States, and a an official entity has confiscated it. So I didn't insure that aircraft. I can reveal that much. But if I'm a betting person, which I'm not, I'm willing to bet they didn't have war risk and allied perils coverage written back into that policy. And so, if that's the case, that aircraft owner is, well, I think there's a saying, but it just ends with out of luck,
Yeah.
because there's not going to be coverage, unfortunately. And that's why I talk about that endorsement, because I've seen it happen, and most people think, "Oh, I don't need that. I'll just forego it. So I want to save a few premium dollars." And that Stinson's another good story to illustrate that point, for sure.
Yeah. And who would think that you'd need war coverage on a Stinson in Minnesota? I mean, that's crazy. But
Most people hear war and think, "Well, if war happens, it doesn't matter." But
mm,
and there is one exposure that insurance doesn't ever cover, and that's nuclear risk. So you can't write back that coverage. So, and that may be the one case if it does happen. Whatever. But
we don't care.
yeah, that war risk exclusion, uh,
Right.
s- malicious acts of sabotage, insurrection, words that I didn't used to hear that I've heard more lately. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Acts of sabotage, malicious acts that are all excluded under that war risk and allied perils exclusion, which can be written back other than the nuclear exposure, or as one of my colleagues loves to say, things that glow in the dark. Um, and yeah, it's important. It's an important one.
Right. Um, your move 10, talking about records, um, do you recommend electronic records for aircraft? And it seems to be preferable, especially to carrying the aircraft or carrying the records on the aircraft, which I know is probably a terrible idea, or leaving them in a hangar somewhere is also a terrible idea. So how do you not do any of those things?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, don't carry your logbooks on the aircraft, your maintenance logs for sure. And yeah, sometimes they get locked up in a fireproof safe. But I think we have a mutual friend who we've had on the aviation insurance podcast in the past, talking about the value of digital records. The only challenge being getting it up to date, but that's why they have a service that does that. But yeah, digital records can be found quickly. They can be reproduced and shared quickly. And just to my point, it's something that you can point other people. If something happens, I'm not around. These are the things you need to send, and here's how you find them. And it's a lot easier to do than trying to track them down at which maintenance shop last had it, and all that type of thing. So they're the electronic is proven to be valid, and it's certainly harder to lose in a fire or otherwise. So I think it's a great recommendation, and I'm all for it.
Right. Next question is basically about how soon is too soon or how late is too late to get your insurance guy involved in the transaction.
Yeah, I'm serious about purchasing something. Is probably that point. A lot of times we want to see if we can get the financing. A lot of times, pilots, we get on controller online or trade a plane or similar sites, and we start dreaming about what's next. And then we think I can afford that, whatever, start getting the bug. So you make a couple calls, hey, we put together a loan on this. Let me start looking. And, insurance absolutely has to be, especially as it's a transition up to a larger, more complicated aircraft. It should be right in there with the call, see if you get money.
Right.
Because, and a lot of aircraft owners have gotten this over the years, but not everyone has, especially on a first time purchase. Because, pretty much I can go to any car dealership and buy any car I want and get insurance on it. And I can also let you drive it, Paula, and whoever I want. Well, an aircraft doesn't work that way. We have to make sure that as pilots, we can get insurance. And then we also can't just let anyone fly the aircraft. They have to meet certain qualifications or they have to be approved by the insurance company. So that's something a lot different than purchasing auto insurance.
Absolutely. Right. Let's switch gears, if you don't mind, and talk about AAOA. You are a very busy guy between insurance and authoring books and the public speaking that you do and several other business endeavors that you're involved in on a regular basis. So, why in the heck would you spend time putting together an aviation association when there are already so many out there?
Well, that's a great question. People often ask, how do you run multiple companies, write books, all these things? And it's really because I've surrounded myself with a good team. I can't do all those things on my own. And that's why we have my remote staffing company, is because without them, I can't do what I do. And, at the end of the day, one person or one organization can't do together what they can do as a team. And the same thing is true with companies. We can grow linearly. What's the word I'm looking for?
Linearly.
Linearly. Thank you.
There you go.
We're
All
recording,
right.
we're recording this in the afternoon, and I'm better in the morning. So linearly, or we can grow exponentially. And I prefer to have impact by growing exponentially. And I know that through collaboration and teamwork with other people, I'm able to do far more in that collaboration or teamwork than I am on my own. And there's a lot of aviation groups out there, but a lot of it's more networking and light marketing based. And for the AAOA, I want to create and be a part of something where that's not what it is. It's active teamwork in providing a solution to the market, and it's active co-marketing where we're actually putting value out, and Paula, you and I lead with it. We both have podcasts, webinars. We lead with value in the industries we serve. And so, the AAOA is not looking to get a ton of members. It's looking to have a great group of people who can serve our target audience, our heroes, right? Our aircraft purchasers and our aircraft operators. And so together we can be, that one stop, people don't have to call and develop their own team. I talked about having the right team because I've seen how important that is. They don't have to piecemeal it. I need to buy an aircraft. I have one source. And AAOA is going to be able to point me in the direction to all these professionals who already know how to work together. And so that's exactly what it's about. It's about doing something rather than networking and just marketing. Marketing is a huge part because we're actively marketing together. We've got this webinar series, which this is the first one. Yay. We got it under our belt, right? Pretty much. And, we've got publications we're working. We've got a lot of things that we're actively working on to put out that will provide value to our customer and bring them together a solution that lessens their friction in purchasing an aircraft, right? It makes it easier for the buyer. And it also is just a built-in resource house, right? So, it's not about mass numbers of members. It's not about just networking. Obviously, there's a network involved, but it's about serving that same group by combining our efforts to do something exponentially greater than we could have done on our own. And that's what it's really about for me. I would rather do what I do in my lane very well, which is how I can run multiple companies and solve big problems in different areas and write books, by surrounding myself with others who complement what I do so that together we can do something much greater.
Fantastic. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up, unless there's anything else that people need to know that we haven't told them yet. I think this is probably, they know more by now about insurance, if they've been paying any attention at all, than probably 99% of the aviation community, which are already very smart people. So
That's right. And we could talk for hours, I know, Paula, and we have before.
we have.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to respect people's time, and so we're coming in right where we wanted to on keeping it right under an hour. And so, obviously, the screen has some contact information for both the aviation insurance and for AAOA. I'm a big fan of both personally. I may be biased, but I'm excited about both. I'm excited about this industry and where we're going, and I'm excited about collaborating with other people to serve our target audience. So. Excited to be a part of AAOA and look forward to seeing, enjoyed the growth we've got so far. And I'm excited about all the things that are working right now that'll be coming to people very soon.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your vast experience with people in the industry. And I think that will save a lot of people a lot of grief if they follow those 10 principles. So thank you for that. And we'll be talking again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paul.